Welcome back, everyone. Let's go ahead and do a comparison between the OnePlus 9 Pro and the original, unique OnePlus 7 Pro. This device from 2019 was a wild device for sure, and I'm happy that we have the successor, which in some ways, I mean, if you look at both these phones, you may still think the OnePlus 7 Pro is like the best phone in the world because it has no camera hole, very little bezel, and when I hold both in the hand and I look at both of them, the 7 Pro gives me the feeling that it's still more of a flagship than the OnePlus 9 Pro, if I'm being completely honest. If you want to pick up either one of these devices, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, side by side, you can kind of see that there really isn't a crazy big difference. They look roughly around the same. They have the same type of width. Feeling in the hand is about the same too. I think the biggest difference in terms of the front, obviously the OnePlus 9 Pro has no camera hold, it has the motorized camera up top, but also you have that 90Hz refresh rate on the OnePlus 9 Pro, where we have that 120Hz refresh rate on the 9 Pro, the 7 Pro and the 9 Pro. Is that a big difference? To be honest, not really. I mean, I'm looking at both of them side by side. I would rather have the 120Hz, but the 90Hz is still plenty good for me for sure. I think there's more of a pronounced curve on the OnePlus 9 Pro than on the I think there's more of a pronounced curve on the OnePlus 7 Pro than the 9 Pro, so keep that in mind. USB Type-C ports on the bottom. Thickness is roughly around the same as well. There's not really that big of a difference between these two. And on the back, we have the glass backs, pretty much the same setup. Triple camera setup on the 7 Pro. We have that quadruple camera setup on the OnePlus 9 Pro. And feeling in the hand is roughly around the same, like I said. The big difference, though, is that the 9 Pro does actually have wireless charging and reverse wireless charging. The 7 Pro has neither one of those, but on top of that, IP certification on the 9 Pro. The 7 Pro has no IP certification. So that's pretty much the major differences, I would say, in terms of the outside. Other than that, they pretty much have the same exact thing going on. Like, I'm still surprised how well the 7 Pro is holding up. Fingerprint sensors in the display as well. Now, I think the main reason why I would recommend going and upgrading from a 7 Pro to the 9 Pro is the longevity of software. The 7 Pro, as most of you know, is still a killer phone and has so much capability, and as most of you know who are 7 Pro users, you were still surprised how good of a performing phone this is. And I think for sure day-to-day it's going to be awesome, but it's not going to last forever, and it's not going to last as long as the 9 Pro. The 9 Pro is going to be the longer lasting phone here, so that is a pretty major thing to keep in mind. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go and upgrade from a 7 Pro to a 9 Pro right now, but it is something to kind of get you in that ball rolling, to kind of be like, okay, the 9 Pro is going to at least probably be getting 2 more years of software experience than the 7 Pro. So if you have all the money in the world, I would recommend going from a 7 Pro to a 9 Pro, but even then it's not really worthwhile because you can still root and custom ROM this thing. But I think the other thing that pretty much makes the 7 Pro not as good as a 9 Pro, like I mentioned before, you're getting potentially better battery life from something like a 9 Pro. But on top of that, you're getting wireless charging and reverse wireless charging. Had the 7 Pro had that capability, I feel like that would have been crazy. Unfortunately, the 7 Pro doesn't have that. So you're kind of strung out of luck when it comes down to it. So side by side, you can definitely see they look the same, but internally there are some pretty big differences. You're going to be getting pretty much a better phone in the software, in the battery life experience department than the 7 Pro. So the 9 Pro is pretty much killing it there, and I think that's pretty much like the biggest differences as I mentioned, but the 7 Pro is still a really good phone in the software department as of right now, and it's still a pretty good battery life device too. So in terms of that pretty much covers up that area. Now let's go and do a quick little, speed comparison between both of these devices. The 9 Pro has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 chipset inside of it with 8 gigs of RAM on the base model and 12 gigs of RAM on the top tier model. This model has 8 gigs. The OnePlus 7 Pro had that Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 chipset with 6 gigs of RAM on the base model, and I think it did go up to 12 gigs, but this one has 6 gigs of RAM. So let's go and see which one is the faster phone between both of these. Okay, now that we're back, let's go and clear all the apps in the background, and those are cleared on the 7 Pro. So let's get started. Let's do phone calls, 3, 2, 1, and about the same. I think the 9 Pro is faster. Messages, 3, 2, 1. Again, about the same thing. Chrome, 3, 2, 1. And kind of about the same thing. I think maybe the 9 Pro is faster there. Camera, 3, 2, 1. I think the 7 Pro actually was faster there to get into that camera. How wild is that? Hopping out of this one, let's do their Play Stores, 3, 2, 1. I think roughly around the same thing too. I was expecting there to be a bigger difference, but there really wasn't. But you can definitely see scrolling speed wise, the 9 Pro is a far faster and smoother scrolling speed than the 7 Pro. This might be the bigger difference between the two. Swiping up, again, you can see both are at 120 Hz and 90 Hz, which doesn't matter because they're at 60 frames or 30 frames per second in this video. But that's a pretty big difference. The animation speeds hopping out, you can kind of see roughly around the same. There's not that big of a difference. Getting into some third-party apps. Let's get into Temple Run 2. 3, 2, 1. And looks like the 9 Pro is definitely in the lead, but it's not like a crazy amount as I mentioned. The 7 Pro still looks like it's doing a pretty good job. There we go, the 9 Pro is loaded, and the 7 Pro was literally just a little bit behind. Like, I don't want to hype up the 7 Pro too much, but it really wasn't like a crazy amount behind. Gameplay wise, is going to be the same too. I mean, it's a basic game. Getting into the next one, let's do Snake versus Blocks. 3, 2, 1. And I think the 9 Pro was slightly faster, but again, the 7 Pro was right behind it. Getting into some gameplay as usual. Looks like it's about the same. Hopping out of this one, let's go into Facebook. 3, 2, 1. The 9 Pro is faster, 7 Pro a little bit behind. Fruit Ninja, 3, 2, 1. And I thought I didn't click it here, and that's one thing. With the 9 Pro, I realized whenever I click on it, it's pretty much there. It's like instantaneous. The 7 Pro, as you can see, glitching up a little bit. We had a little bit of a different panel here, but still the 9 Pro is faster to get into the next panel, I would say. Now, another problem I had with the 7 Pro is swiping up, as you guys can see. Because the curve is kind of big, it does kind of make it hard to swipe up, but I still like the curve. Quizlet, 3, 2, 1. 7 Pro actually was faster there. I was not expecting that. Stack, which I don't have. Thank you. 3, 2, 1. And the 9 Pro was faster, but the 7 Pro, dude, was like right there. It was like so neck and neck. It was so close to one another. Hopping out of this specific app, let's get into the next one, which can be like Twitter. 3, 2, 1. And I think the 7 Pro again was the faster one there. I mean, you guys correct me in the comments, but I think that was like right neck and neck to one another again. Snapchat, 3, 2, 1. Almost neck and neck, like side by side. So I think, to be honest, and to give the both phones the benefit of the doubt, I am surprised how good of a performing phone the 7 Pro is compared to the OnePlus 9 Pro. You guys saw it with your own hands. They were neck and neck. They were so close to one another. Now, would I rather have a 7 Pro over a 9 Pro? Probably not. But dude, that's still pretty crazy. How good, you guys saw it. The 7 Pro is still a really good performing phone between these two. And the RAM management seems to be about the same on both too, so there's not really that big of a difference. But I think honestly, the 9 Pro is the faster one by a little bit, but the 7 Pro definitely held it down for sure. So in terms of that, that pretty much covers it up. Now let's go and hit on the cameras. Now, as I mentioned before, triple camera setup on the 7 Pro, wide, ultra-wide, and telephoto lens, where the OnePlus 8 where the OnePlus 9 Pro has that wide, ultra-wide telephoto, and then a color depth lens as well, whatever they call it. Now, I think for sure the 7 Pro's camera, it's definitely not fooling anybody. It's definitely not like the best camera ever made, but it did have a novelty with that pop-up front camera, which was very funny. But I think other than that, this camera is okay. Like, as you can see, the zooming in and out, this one actually seems smoother than the 9 Pro. So look at how this one zooms in and out. And I'll show you these 9 Pro in a second because it's so glitchy. But this camera I think is good enough for the most part. It's not going to knock anybody's socks off. You can do 4K at 60, which is cool on the back camera, but only 1080p on the front, which is the same thing on the 9 Pro. But I will tell you, this camera doesn't have the craziest amount of features, but it does have some capability, which I'm really happy about. As you guys can see, there's some more options here, and I think this thing did have Pro mode on one of the options, I don't remember, but it does have a pretty decent photo capability and video capability, so I think that gets a thumbs up for me for sure. But the 9 Pro, in my opinion, definitely has the far better camera here, hands down. This thing's camera is pretty good. I mean, you have 8K capability, as you can see just there. Like, the photo quality is so much better. Just like look at the whiteness between them. This is like almost gray. This is like pitch white in my opinion compared to this. And I think this camera is solid. It's definitely not the best camera. I think the S21 has a better camera. I think the S20 has a better camera. But the thing that lets me down the most is, first of all, as you can see, zooming in and zooming out, it doesn't look as smooth as something like the OnePlus 7 Pro. And I noticed this with my other devices too. It's a little glitchy. Not a crazy big deal though, but a bigger option. But another issue I have is the front camera. Only 1080p on this front camera as well. The back camera, they may have improved it like crazy, but I'm one of those people, I use the front camera a lot more. So that really did kind of break my soul a little bit. But I think definitely for sure the OnePlus 9 Pro's camera is better than the 7 Pro, but I'm still surprised how good of a camera OnePlus was able to put on the 7 Pro at that time. This is not even that great of a camera. It definitely wasn't the best camera of that year, but I think it gets the job done, and I think as time progresses, we start to appreciate it a little bit more. So to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you go and buy a OnePlus 7 Pro? Should you buy a OnePlus 9 Pro? Should you upgrade, whatever? I'll definitely tell you, if you have a 7 Pro, I would honestly recommend keeping it. I really don't think I would upgrade from a OnePlus 7 Pro to a 9 Pro. These phones are so similar in so many different ways, and there are still some advantages of picking up something like the 7 Pro. I feel like this phone has really cool capability when it comes down to just the curved display, the motorized pop-up camera. As I mentioned before, I mean, when you look at both of them, does one necessarily look more like a flagship than the other? think when it comes down to it, the 9 Pro doesn't even look as good as like a 7 Pro. The displays are very good, but I don't know. I think the 9 Pro is definitely the better phone. I'm not trying to say the 7 Pro is better. This device is hands down the better one. If you have the money, definitely get it. You're getting a 120 hertz display. I guess a better back camera. Front cameras are roughly around the same. You're getting that motorized pop-up camera on the 7 Pro though, which is kind of a novelty. I don't like it, but I think it's cool. Better performance in the 9 Pro? Barely, though. I mean, you guys saw with my speed comparison in the RAM management test. These were like neck and neck. I was surprised. I was expecting the 9 Pro to be the winner every single time. That ended up not being the case. The 9 Pro was still a really good phone, but the 7 Pro was like killing it in so many different areas, which is so impressive. Battery life is going to be better here. You have IP certification, and you have wireless charging and reverse wireless charging. But the 7 Pros are so cheap now that it's just like you can get these for like less than $300 in a lot of places I've seen. So it's almost like a no-brainer in my opinion. But the 9 Pro is still a solid phone too. You can't really go wrong with either one of these. I wouldn't necessarily buy a 7 Pro over a 9 Pro, but if you have a 7 Pro, I'd recommend keeping it. But if you have all the money or if you're already upgrading, the 9 Pro I think is a pretty solid upgrade from a 7 Pro in my opinion. So in terms of that, that pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.